People all around the world dream of becoming an auction house expert, working at a Christie's, a Sotheby's, a Heritage, but they're often mistaken in how to get there. They think it involves learning perfectly scholarship in a library, mastering the history of their category, when in fact, being an expert at a top auction house is about 50% scholarship, and the other 50% is client management and deal making. So, how do you become this top auction house expert? Today, we're going to break it down with none other than Vicki Paloympis, head of Chinese works of art at Christie's, New York. Vicki started as a sale administrator and worked her way up to becoming a vice president. What is it? And for this episode, we're going to use the word expert or specialist, but as I said, other categories use the word consignment director. But what does it actually mean to be an expert at an auction house?
Well, that's a great question because I think that it can actually mean so many different things depending on the category. I think that most generally it means having a certain level of expertise in a category. It means working with clients to source property for auction or for private sale, and also taking a very pivotal role in selling those pieces that you source, or actually selling everything in your sale. But I think that what I think is interesting about the specialist role is I think there's a lot of room to mold this to people's skills and strengths. So at Christie's, a specialist might also be a project manager and might work on many large appraisals. Some specialists specialize in micro categories in their field. In my field, that could just be Chinese furniture or Chinese jades, but other specialists are more generalists within their fields. And some might be very research focused. Some might have more business savvy. So I think the involvement in property and in selling is a must. But the actual role can really change depending on someone's skills.
We're gonna get into this, but I love how you talk about this as part of the magic of being a specialist is it starts with the object and the category and the collector, but to the point, the weighting within which you're someone who enjoys sales and business getting versus you're someone who's deeply scholarly and category and love sort of diving into category and text. It's driven by both the market and the category, but also you can pursue your passion throughout your career and find places in both spots.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
so with that, what is the biggest misconception people have about what you do?
Well, I think I've heard a few different misconceptions. I think that one major misconception, at least in the Chinese works of art field, is I think people imagine specialists sitting in a library with thousands of old books, just researching, all day and all night. Which is in part what we do, but there is a certain amount of business savvy that's needed because you are making business deals, you are negotiating on behalf of the company, and actually, I think while Christie's is an art business, it's just as much a client business. So I think while you need to be savvy in the art, you also need to be savvy with the clients. So I think there's as much client facing that happens as research. So I think that's one thing. And I think in my field, another thing is that people don't realize that us specialists are responsible for authenticating everything in our sale, which is a little bit different with fields that sell living artists or fields where there's an artist estate or a catalog raisonné or a known expert. We authenticate everything. So there is a certain amount of research that needs to be done, and a lot of object handling and thinking and a lot of responsibility goes along with that. So I think a lot of people are surprised to hear that.
I think on that, and the next question is, and I think Chinese works of art is such a good example of this, of what you talked about, of expansive as well as niche at the same time, of like you can have a wide range of what your category covers, but also need to have also driving expertise within a specific area of that. Can you walk through what does Chinese works of art include as a category?
Well, it really includes a lot. A very general definition would be that it includes all three-dimensional objects from as early as the Neolithic period. And, really, it could go up to the present. We often sell ceramics, furniture, jade, textiles, lacquer, cloisonne, basically anything that is not a painting. Traditionally, our field kind of stopped in the early Republic period or early 20th century. But more recently, we're starting to dabble a bit more in more contemporary works by Chinese artists.
And I'm going to jump questions on this because I think it relates to this. Vicky, when someone says, I'm too scared to try an expertise role, I don't have enough expertise yet. What do you sort of say to them of how learning on the job versus like how much expertise do you need going into a role?
I think, you know, I this is a hard question. I think that you definitely need to start with passion. I think you need to truly love something because if you don't love it, it's going to be too painful to build expertise, to put the time in that you would need to put in to build expertise. You won't want to have long conversations with clients about their pieces if you don't truly love them. I really think, people ask me all the time, what should you think about when you're collecting? And I also tell them that it starts with really loving an object, but I also feel that that's really important in going into this field. Um, so I think, you really need to go into a field. If you want to be a specialist, you have to really be passionate about the piece, about the type of art that you're working with. And I think from there, there's a certain amount that you will learn in the field. You will handle a lot of objects. You will meet a lot of clients and exhibitions. There the healing sessions where we review property as a group is the best learning. We heal hundreds of pieces a season, sometimes thousands of pieces a year. And if you handle all of those pieces, you will start to gain some kind of tactile knowledge that will help you really learn what the material should feel like and what it should look like. I think eventually a certain amount of academic knowledge is helpful. And in my field, I would say a certain amount is necessary because scholarship changes so much. We really pride ourselves on making sure that our catalogs are correct, on being able to authenticate these pieces, correctly, have the correct attribution. So I do think eventually it is, important to get also that academic background, but I don't think you need to necessarily start there.
So, from your personal story, when did you realize this was the category you wanted to be in? And what advice do you have for someone who is thinking about auction houses but doesn't necessarily know what category they want to be in?
So for me, I knew I wanted to work with Chinese art. When my career first started at Christie's, I was coming off of an education in Chinese language at Nanjing University. I studied contemporary art. I lived in China for several years. I spent a lot of time with contemporary artists, and I was very interested in the Chinese contemporary art world. Um, so, back then there really wasn't many job opportunities in that area in the States. So I moved back. I started working at Christie's. I joined the Chinese department. But immediately sitting in on my first few healing sessions, I realized I love ceramics. I love textiles. I truly love them. I loved handling them. I loved looking at them. I loved, sitting in the warehouse at 10 o'clock at night, cataloging them. I began to build a foundation. But I already had, the foundation of Chinese history. I already had the foundation of Chinese language. But I later fell in love with antiques. And then 10 years into my career, I went back and got a master's in archaeology, with a focus on 14th and 15th century ceramics. But that was extra and I think really fun given I had already had all the experience at Christie's. But it was I kind of figured out that I loved it in the role. And I think that a lot of people I know at Christie's, will join a department and figure out that they love something. I've seen a lot of people start out in like an admin role or in a coordinator role in one department and then realize that they love the work of this other department, make some connections there, and then kind of pivot to where they want to be. So, I also think that if you think you want to work with art, getting your foot in the door is really important, and being willing to start at the bottom is really important. Because once you're here, you'll have so much access, and I think there's no better way to figure out, what you want to do. And so, I think if you don't know what category you would want to belong to, I think it's, what do you like? And even just coming to auction houses and walking around different previews, you might
Yeah.
really find yourself drawn to something and something that you never really realized existed. So, I would always start there.
Uh, I think it's a great point, and I'll highlight from sort of what I've seen too. But to your point, the right part of the wonder of if you go to a large auction house early on in your career is that you have so many options of networking opportunities. Literally, I spent most of my time at Christie's crashing other departments' hilling sessions where they reviewed property because it was just fun. And you have so many options of sort of the ability to learn and be exposed to and gain insight into categories. If that's not your journey, and you end up, let's say you end up at a more category specific smaller house or a gallery or something like that, then my recommendation would sort of be you go to, exactly to your point, go to auction house previews, go to trade shows are all over the country of different categories, go talk to people. And if you have the means and are willing to start, and certainly you can be in items, you don't have to be an auction house level collector, but try buying and selling some things on a secondary marketplace and see what you need to learn and if that interests you. But there really is so much opportunity to learn. But I think the large auction houses do have this really special magic that you truly can walk downstairs or walk across the hall, which I can say from personal experience that does not exist in it's harder to replicate in other places, and to find that earlier on in your career if you don't go to one of those.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
and so what let's talk about this mix of like business development versus scholarship. Um, like for you, when you're thinking about sort of a career progression, um, how do you think about those two skill sets? And how do you weight those skill sets if someone is sort of starting out, versus further along in their career, what can they expect?
I think, honestly, I think a lot of it has to do also with self-awareness. Because I think that it's really important to be very self-aware of what you know, what you don't know, and elegant ways to talk about it with clients if it comes up on the spot, and where you would find out so you could be able to get that information. And this might seem like a weird place to start, but I think that this is a very important thing because if you're, a more junior specialist and the client asks you a question, and our clients are very knowledgeable, and you pretend that you know the answer, but you don't, you will immediately be disregarded,
Yeah.
and that relationship will just crumble, and I think that, I realized early on that there's a way to gain, respect, by just saying, that's a great question. I'll let me get the answer for you shortly. And then also the next time someone asks you that question, you will know right away. Um, so I think it's important to be able to navigate that correctly because if you give bad advice, that relationship is over. I think it's also really important, and again, back to, going to auctions and handling things. You need to handle objects to be able to know when something is rare or particularly good quality. Clients ask this all the time, should I buy this piece? And if I know what's in someone's collection, I can say, yes, this fits in really well. You have pieces from these three dynasties, you need this one. Or no, no, you have something better quality, this doesn't fit for you. Or you're building in this area. This is a great starter piece. The estimate is reasonable. It has some condition issues, but maybe you don't care about that because it presents really well. So, I think when you're further on in your career, you need to be able to, you will be able to say those things and have those conversations. That's where you're trying to get to. But the way to get there is through handling. Um, and I also think that before you have this knowledge, how do you build clients? And I think one of the ways is just through the same relationship building skills that you build your whole life. The way that you make friends, the way that you deal with people, out in the world. You need to show that you are reliable and helpful and respectful, and this is a foundation. So maybe when you're starting out, a client sees you as someone who can get them information. And maybe a little bit later on, you're somebody that they can go to ask for advice. And I think, there's no way when you're just starting out, you're not going to be the main contact for, the biggest client in your field. But, I think something that I did is met some collectors and clients who were kind of at the same level as I was, and we grew together. So that's one way to build a client portfolio. Another way is helping senior people with more important clients or with clients who have bigger demands and trying to understand how do they give them what they need, what kind of information do they give them, what are they looking at when they go to their houses. So, I think this client specialist relationship will morph and will change. But yeah, it's based on, just a normal, like friendly, respectful relationship, and then you go from there.
Uh, to your point, when you're at an auction house like Christie's, and especially in your department, right, there's not going to be you're you're building trust with your client over time, and there's not always going to be a direct comp that's just sitting there that's the truth that's telling you what the value of an item is. They're coming to you, I think Vicki's are saying part of the reason they're coming to you is because they're looking for you to source property, but also to help guide them on what makes sense in a space that is when things are truly rare and unique, aren't going to always have a ton of historic market data to back up that result, whereby like there is a real relationship to trust you in being guided. Is that kind of accurate?
That's definitely accurate. I think that, yeah, the objects that we sell are very unique. And um, I think that clients trust our logic in pricing pieces. I think that and that comes out with the auction results. I mean, auctions are public. So, if we were really off and clients really didn't believe that things were worth what we put on them, things would not sell. But I think also, our sell-through rates are typically 90%, 95%. It shows that we're pricing things correctly. Maybe that we price things on the slightly conservative side. But I think that because we've had so many consecutive seasons with those kinds of results, that also builds a general trust in our pricing. Clients see the same team pricing objects, and they'll also say, okay, well, I've seen the history. I see how this team does. I see how this team prices. I trust this. But honestly, if somebody asks me about a piece in our catalog and why we priced it a certain way, even if there are no direct comps, you know, we might end up talking about six or seven different objects, but there's a logic, and we'll get there.
Um, so final question, if you were to teach someone um, how to become an auction house expert in 5 steps. What are those 5 steps for you?
Number one, handle as many objects as possible. This is number one. If you don't handle objects, you don't see them in person, you cannot become familiar with them, you cannot authenticate them. These are things that are meant to be seen in person. The magic is in person. So I think that is absolutely the number one thing. The number two thing is watching auctions in person. We're in an interesting world where we still have in-person auctions, and I think that being there in person helps you understand how much demand there is, how much bidding is there. Are people bidding in the room? Are they bidding online? And this could inform future strategy for a similar lot. You might say, okay, there's 10 bidders, they're all online. Maybe this is a good lot to be sold online. Or, there's 5 bidders in the room and they're all from a certain country or a certain place. All right, maybe there's a certain demand there. And then, if Mr., B, C, and D didn't get the piece, then maybe we'll find them another one. So there's a lot of information that comes from watching auctions in person. So I think that's really, really important for market knowledge. I also think when you're starting out that partnering with senior specialists is very important because they will teach you how to look at things. They will teach you how they think about things when they're appraising them, when they're authenticating them. So going on appraisals with them, sitting with them on pricing sessions, I think is really important. I think for me, it really taught me so much. And they'll also introduce you to clients, and you'll form your own relationships, and eventually you'll have your own expertise, and you'll have a part on the team as well. Um, Another thing that I think, is definitely undervalued is being present in your own exhibition. We often hire people to help with the exhibition, but I think it's really important for specialists to be on the exhibition, especially for junior specialists to be at the exhibition, because this is where you will meet clients. This is where you'll hear their expertise, and they might have ideas and opinions and thoughts about pieces that you're not hearing, that you're not hearing your specialist colleagues have. They might have different perspectives. You might meet a new client, have a great relationship with them, and they might become your biggest client 5 years later. So I think it's really important in client development, really important for market knowledge. Yeah, I get so much out of being in the exhibition, even though it's exhausting work, but I think you learn a lot. Um, and I was thinking about this before, and I had a really hard time with the fifth thing, and thinking about what the fifth thing would be. And I kind of settled on going to other departments' exhibitions, um, because I think that when you're working within a department, there tends to be a lot of institutional knowledge and a lot of doing things a certain way. You'll see quickly when you start looking at auction catalogs or auctions that certain departments have their specific flair, their way of doing things. But eventually, as you grow in your role, you need to, be willing to change, and be willing to look at new ideas. And there might always be a better way to do something or an interesting way to do something. A different department might have a person who is more tech savvy than you, who just has like really innovative ideas, a great way to display something. So I think that if you want to take it to the next step, opening your eyes beyond your field is really important. And so that I think is the last thing I'd recommend.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Vicki. This was super helpful, and I know there's so many people out there that are curious and looking as to how to become a head of department, how to become an expert. And I just really appreciate you taking the time to walk through your experience and give advice. So thank you.
You're welcome. Always happy to chat.
And thank you to everybody for watching. If you'd like to learn more about auction houses and just subscribe to Build to Collect. And thank you again. Thank you.